Okay, so welcome to the Comparative U.S.-France Land Use Field Study course. I want to make sure I got the long title right for you. This is a very exciting, new, innovative offer from Vermont Law School as part of our summer program, focusing on land use, but with an important twist, because it has a field component and it has a comparative component. The comparative component is we are going to...
There's Professor McHenry.
One moment. Hello?
Hello, it's Tom McHenry.
Okay, well, very good. We have just started, so I will introduce you in a moment.
Fantastic, thank you. I ended up getting reception there, so sorry.
Very good. So as I said, there's a comparative aspect of this. And that is that we are going to study land use in three different parts of the world. One is California, one is Vermont, and one is France. And one of the advantages of that approach is that land use presents across the world a set of common issues. How to preserve farmland, how to build energy efficient communities, how to control sprawl, how to maintain and revive older urban centers. Those are common. What turns out to be interesting is that the approaches in different parts of the United States and in different countries vary a great deal. And so, if you will, the thesis of this course is that we're going to learn more by looking at how these different issues are approached in different parts of the world than we would by just learning intensively how one particular jurisdiction approaches the issue. And we'll go into more detail about what we're going to do in each of those countries. The other part of this is going to be a field course. Now, for better or for worse, we're not going to California. But we are bringing California to you in the form of my co-teacher in this course, who's Tom McHenry, who's on the phone here. Tom is a partner with the law firm of Gibson Dunn in Los Angeles. He's a longtime environmental lawyer. He does a lot of work on land use issues. He works with land trusts. He's the regular counsel to one of the largest land conservancies, the Tejon Ranch in California. He is taught here on the summer faculty, teaches at Claremont McKenna College in California, and he works regularly and knows a great deal about land use issues. But as I say, we're not going to California. We're bringing California here in the form of Tom McHenry. We will be here in Vermont, and the idea is to not only spend some time in the classroom talking about Vermont land use law and policy, but spend some time on the road and go up to Montpelier and talk to people who administer the Act 250 program up there, and also spend some time talking to people who manage land trusts and look at land trust protected properties here in the United States. And then the sort of most exciting, sexy part of the field project involves getting on a plane and going to the great nation of France, where we would go to Paris, spend a couple of days in Paris talking to policymakers, officials, people in the private sector who deal with land use issues, understanding what land use looks like from Paris. As you may know, Paris is organized a little differently than the United States. We have a decentralized federal system in which a lot of decisions are made at the state level. The hallmark of the French political system is that a lot of decisions are made at the national level. So, if you wanted to learn about land use in the United States, you wouldn't go to Washington, D.C., but in France, you do go to Paris to learn about land use. But then if you want to see how it's administered on the ground, you need to get out of Paris. So we're going to get on a train and go down to the south of France near Avignon and stay there and meet with local officials, different movers and shakers in the land use field, look at the landscape, look how the actual results of management policies in France. So that's the comparative, that's the field component. The course begins on May 18th, Monday. The idea would be to be here in Vermont, learning about Vermont and California through the end of the day, through the end of Thursday, at which point we'd go down to to Logan, get on a plane, go to Paris, arrive on Friday morning. Since everyone will have slept very well on the plane and be ready to go, we'll get right to work on Friday morning. We plan some activities for Saturday as well. Sunday would be a free day. Monday we have some additional meetings in Paris, and then probably on Monday afternoon, get on a train and go down to the south of France, where we will be staying. We hope at a large inn type operation near the town of Gourd, and we would stay there through Saturday. And then you could, if you wanted to, you could take a train back to Paris and take a plane back the following morning and get back here by Sunday evening, long day. You could go to Nice and fly back, or you could, if you had the time and the resources, you could hang out for a little while longer in France. So it begins on the 18th, it ends on the 30th. One of the unique features of this course is that, as far as when we don't do regularly, and I don't know if we've ever done in the past, is we are inviting VLS alumni who have experience and interest in land use to join this. So we have students in the room who are interested. There are other students who've talked to me who can't be here today who are interested in doing this. So we hope to put together a core group of students who want to go on this course, but we've also marketed this to alumni who are going to be a different set of life experience, a little bit older, less immersed in academics, but bringing other life experiences to the table. So I think it'll be, and if they're, instead of going to, a tour of the Chateau of France or going on a barge trip in France, they want to go on a land use course. These people are, our kind of nerds. People who like the idea of a field course, like lifetime learning, and of course they're going to be VLS grads. So we'll put this mix of people together, which I think will be exciting and interesting. In terms of costs, if you are planning to attend the summer program at Vermont Law School, you will be required to pay tuition to attend the summer program at Vermont Law School. And if you've done that, then your tuition for this course is covered. Unfortunately, however, there are some additional costs associated with going to France. And just as with the China program or the Montana program that we run, unfortunately, students have to bear some additional cost, and the financing of those costs through our financial aid system and so on can be appropriately addressed by Ann or Courtney, who knows all about this, if you have particular questions about that. But the bottom line is that we expect for the students, the cost will be about $1,800 in the great nation of France. On top of that, there will be airfare, depending on how soon we all book airplanes. Those could be under 1,000 or a little more than 1,000. So you're looking at about $3,000 total to pull this off. So that's the basic outline. I thought Tom and I might go into a little more detail about what we're going to talk about when we talk about California land use, what we're going to talk about when we talk about Vermont land use, what we're going to do in Paris and Provence. A lot of that is laid out in this overview. But maybe I should stop there and see if there are any questions, comments. Yes?
As far as language skills, is there any kind of requirement for that?
No. You will need sufficient skill so that when you go into a bar, you can order a beer, and you need to say café au lait and things like that. But no. Happily for us, Europeans are much better languages than Americans are. So we are lining up people who speak sufficient English to make this work. And if they teach a kind of a pidgin English, we will muddle through. But you do not need to have French language skill to do this. Yes.
So I've never been on a plane. And I'm wondering, as far as leaving Vermont to go to France, will the concept be that we try and do that leg together?
We can, I think what they've done in the China program, and I think we're gonna follow this model generally, is that we'll tell people they're free to go at a particular time, and they need to arrive by a particular time. And if they prefer to fly Icelandic Air or American Airlines, they can do it. And I'm told in the case of the China program, which seems like a much more daunting travel challenge, it works out fine. Having said that, I think a small group of us will want to go together. And if you wanted to go as part of the group, that would be dandy. You know, we'd go down, we'd caravan down, we'd probably take go to the Dartmouth shuttle and take the Dartmouth shuttle down to Logan and take the plane together and go down to the airport. So there's no problem. Would be no problem in making sure you're accompanied on the trip. So.
Can I just add to that and say one of the things that I've noticed that the Montana group does is that the class very quickly becomes connected either through a twin site or just having everyone's email together. And what I've seen in the past students do is someone will say, oh hey, I just was looking for airline tickets this afternoon and I found a great deal on Southwest Airlines or American Airlines, and here's when it's leaving and here's the price right now, to try and get people to purchase similarly that way.
Part of my challenge is having a service dog, so I can't just go online. I have to talk and make sure I've got all the requirements and a seating situation that has legroom for him. I just had to cancel out of the conference in Oregon because of that. But May should have longer lead time to work things out, I would hope.
Yes, I don't know what the rules are about international travel with service dogs and planes. I just don't know what those. You don't know either, I take it.
No, but we do have a student who's from Switzerland who has a dog. She may know, and certainly the airlines. So
Sure.
I'll just start figuring out what airlines would be the ones we'd be taking and talk to them early on.
Yeah, I mean the concern is I think with pets, which is not what we're talking about here, but with pets, there is there's sort of a quarantine period. There can be a quarantine period.
Yeah, that would be part of the question.
And that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway. But I think it's great that you're willing to look at these challenges and overcome them. I think it would be great. Yes.
Would there be any sort of academic prerequisite you'd like to have for the students?
No, I mean I think if you happen to have taken Janet Milne's land use course, then you'd have a kind of sound general grounding in this. But we'll provide some basic readings on the Vermont land use system and what we're doing in France, and this is going to be an approach where we're going to dive in and learn about a couple of California programs, learn about Act 250, and learn about what's going on in France and do some contrast and compare. And so it's going to be kind of diving into the deep end in a variety of different ways. I don't think you're going to come out of this saying, well, gee, I think I'm really ready to practice land use law and policy in the United States. This is not really that course. This is something that will educate you about, in a more ambitious and larger sense, about the range of alternative ways in which the land use issue can be approached. So, yes.
So, where in the realm of the Masters in Ag and Food or the certificate in food would this course fit in? Is it?
I believe it's an elective for any of the master's degrees, and I think it's not going to be one that will count towards the Ag certificate. I think it was approved to count towards the land use certificate, but that's the only one.
Thanks.
So would it be useful to just spend a couple of minutes, I don't want to keep people here, but why don't we spend another 10 minutes and just go through a little bit of the content of the course, you understand what we'd actually be looking at, and then we'll let you go. So Tom, Tom?
I'm on.
Okay, are you on another conference call in addition to this one? Courtney's laughing at me.
I won't respond. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
hear you fine. So I was going to let you hold forth about, you're going to bring California to us. What are you going to tell us? And what are you going to expose us to with respect to land use law and policy in California?
Great. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Give me a sense how many folks do we have in the room?
About 300.
That's what I like.
No,
a large
we
audience.
have about 10 enthusiastic people in the room.
Fantastic. And by the way, dogs are very welcome in French restaurants, by the way, unlike the United States. And the word for beer in French is bière, which is very much like the word beer, so it would be an easy translation. Let me give you just a little bit of background. John's done a wonderful job of describing the course and the intention overall, so I agree with everything that he has said, which is probably the first time I've ever done so. And one way I've thought about this course in a sort of conceptual way is any of you have had the opportunity to fly into a European airport and look down or just seen maps of what European towns and villages and countryside look like, you'll notice a very different set of land use patterns from the ones you'd see in Vermont around you now, and particularly from those of California, which I'm sure most of you think of and associate with service stations and strip malls. And one of the impetuses of teaching this course is my desire, and I think John's as well, to learn more about why those historical land use patterns developed, how European countries, but in this case the French, have attempted to preserve their agricultural and scenic landscape in a lived-in environment that's been lived in for a longer period of time and developed for a longer period of time. And then how they're dealing with some of the more modern issues that John's already mentioned, like transportation, infill, density, providing adequate housing, and managing energy usage and carbon emissions. So those are all issues that apply across the three jurisdictions we'll look at: California, Vermont, and France. And I think will be interesting. And John, you may want to talk in a moment about, I think, the idea we had of having all the students who take the course for credit do a paper, but I'll leave that to you. In terms of the California-specific version, California is the largest state in terms of population. It's the third largest state in terms of geographical area. And California has been a leader in environmental law and land use planning and regulation for a very long period of time. And there are a couple of new developments in California, a variety of new developments of an interest from a land use standpoint, but one in particular has been a companion land use planning state law, which is a complement to our state law on carbon emissions, which is referred to as AB 32, which stands for Assembly Bill 32. This is Senate Bill 375, and it attempts to try to force development to be more clustered, more infill, reduce sprawl, but not in the name of specifically reducing carbon emissions. And so we're going to look at some of those measures, and we're going to look at the tension between state land use efforts at a legislative level and local land use planning, because land use planning in California is very much a local function. That's different in Vermont, as John will explain, and particularly different in France, where there's really a much more layered structure with a national overlay. So one of the tensions we'll be looking at in the class is the one between national and regional and local land use planning. And as we increasingly live in a society in which our actions have regional and statewide and national and global impacts, understanding how that works seems to me to be very important. So we'll look at Senate Bill 375 and those efforts. And then we'll look at something a little bit different here in California, which I think is a particularly good example of the issues that take place in the western United States, where we have large areas of federal land. California is about 50%, I think it's like 48.5% of California is owned by the federal government. And a recent effort in California is something called the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan process, or since it's environmental law and land use law, there's always an acronym, it's DRECP. The DRECP is an effort to take about 1/3 of the state of California, approximately 22 million acres, and come up with a plan to sensibly locate and permit solar and wind renewable facilities to meet the renewable portfolio standard in California. And we're going to look at some land use planning where you have a mixture of large amounts of federal land, some smaller amounts of private inholdings, some state lands, and then federal lands under varying jurisdictions. So you'll get some sense of how, even though we don't have national land use planning in the United States, and as John points out, you don't go to Washington, D.C. to find out about land use planning, we do have this disproportionately large role that the federal government plays in land use planning, which, if you're doing land use planning in the western states, ends up being very important and having very large impacts. So those are the two measures that we'll look at. And for those of you who are looking for good paper topics, because I think we will have a paper, or just interested in those subject areas, we'll be looking at those, and then we'll be looking at how in Vermont the state land use planning model has worked. And then when we get to France, we'll be looking at the relationship that the federal government, or the national government, l'État as they call it, the state, interacts with the regions, with the departments, and then with the individual towns and villages, which are typically called communes, in that way. So anyway, that's the California portion. John, you want to do Vermont, and then I'll quickly do Paris?
Okay. So Vermont, we're going to look at two things. One is conservation easements, private conservation easements. A peculiarly American invention. You go to France, you're not going to find conservation easements. But we have them in the United States, and we have them in spades here in Vermont. A larger percentage of Vermont's landscape is under conservation easement protection than any other state in the nation. And so we want to focus in on that system, the pros and cons of that system, how it got started in Vermont, how it got financed, how it's managed, some of the challenges that are now confronting that system as the donors of land pass on, as climate change challenges approach us, as agricultural technology evolves, and we have this large static body of land under conservation easement protection. How is it going to be managed over the static and growing body of land under easement protection? How is that going to be managed in the future? The second issue is Act 250. Vermont is one of a large handful of states in the United States, and Vermont was one of the first that established a measure of state-level land use planning and regulation through the landmark Act 250 program, which provides for state level, it's actually implemented through a variety of district boards scattered around the state, representing the state, for review of major land use. And Act 250 is controversial, its merits are much debated. People credited in saving Vermont from becoming a lot like New Hampshire. Other people blame it for stifling economic development. But learning about how that major state-level regulatory program works will be the second focus. As I say, part of that, our field course element will be going up to Montpelier and talking to the people who administer the Act 250 program in the state capital. So Paris?
Well, Paris kind of sells itself, as you can imagine, but I was there over Christmas for 2 weeks doing some initial research on this, and I think what we're going to do in Paris is we're going to have essentially what amounts to a day and a half of meetings, probably with a interministerial entity known as DATAR, which is the, I can't remember the name of all the words, but it is a national interministerial agency that coordinates land use planning across France. They have both an advisory but also a financial role, and as I understand it, this is part of what we'll be learning about, much of the national input on land use planning has to do with financing and financing various planning efforts. We'll also learn from them some of the tensions that are currently at work on the balance between departmental control. France is divided into 99 different departments, which were originally set up to be quite small so that citizens would have the ability to walk to the capital of their department in a single day. This was in 1790. And that's no longer necessary because most people have public transportation or can drive. And so there is now a move towards a greater regional level of governance in France, which relates to land use planning and a variety of other things. And we'll learn more about that tension and where that's going now. In fact, that very subject was one of the things that François Hollande, the president of France, spoke about in his State of the Union address, which was just done on New Year's Day. We'll also hopefully meet with some planning officials for the city of Paris. For those of you who know something about Paris and what has happened, Paris has had, for the last two mayors, have been very leftist, very socialist, and very interested in trying to drive cars out of the city of Paris, install a variety of bike lanes, make Paris a very bike-friendly city, but also trying to see about increasing the availability of housing closer to the city center. And we're hopefully going to go on a field trip to visit one of these areas that's being redeveloped and learn a bit more about the redevelopment process. We also have some contacts with a law firm that represents agricultural interests in France. Agriculture has typically been politically very, very powerful. And we're going to spend a little time talking to them a little bit about regulation of agriculture and open space, but also trying to get some knowledge about an area that John is expert in, which is private property rights and how private property rights are managed and the tension between development and regulation. So that'll be the portion that we're in Paris, and then we'll also, as John said, have a free day, which is that Sunday, which people can go off and do whatever sorts of things they want. John's actually going to be in Paris, I think, next month or the month after, and we know the city well enough to give you lots of good ideas, but it'll give you a chance to have a fun day exploring.
Yeah, I think you're kind of emphasizing the fun aspect of this quite a bit, and I don't know if that's appropriate in this academic setting. I mean, it's okay to mention.
That's probably causing Courtney and Ann to laugh, but I think the students are taking it more seriously.
All the other stuff sounds really fun too, though.
So then we get on a train and we get to ride on the TGV, which is the train de grande vitesse, which is a super bullet train in France, which travels at if you've taken the train up here on Amtrak and then you get to take the TGV, you'll be astonished by the contrast. It will move with an amazing speed from France down to Avignon, where we will stay for the remainder of the course. And the purpose to go out in the field is to gain an appreciation of sort of this fundamental fact about the difference between land use law and policy in France and that in the United States. If you are a vineyard owner in France, you own a vineyard. And when you go to sell it, your expectation and the expectation of your neighbors and the expectation of your prospective purchaser is that they are buying a vineyard. In the United States, I think it's fair to say that everyone who owns any piece of rural property, undeveloped property in the United States, thinks of it as a New Jersey subdivision in waiting, and that they have a vested property right to do that, in which somebody may interfere with, the government may regulate out of existence, or a land trust may scoop up by buying a conservation easement, but there is an expectation of being able to develop land in the United States. Farmers in Europe do not have that expectation because the legal and social tradition has been that land that is set aside for agricultural purposes is not land that's set aside for development. Some of it may have to be, as a matter of public policy. The government may apply development rights to those lands, but a landowner has no inherent right to develop the property. And so we want to sort of let you experience that difference by talking to people and walking on the land. So we're going to be talking with a friend of mine, a very fascinating guy named Max Falk, who's a Frenchman, owner of rural property, who is a libertarian property rights advocate in France. A very oddball point of view in France, contrary to the culture, but who's a resistor against all of the draconian, strict, effective regulation that goes on in France. He's a dissenter, and we'll tap his insights into why he thinks it's not a good system, why it's not an efficient system, why it's an unfair system. At the same time, we're going to be talking to local officials who are implementing the program and learning from them how they manage land development, when it occurs, and how they administer the very strict architectural controls, historic preservation controls, and open space controls. One of the geographic focuses will be something called the National Park of the Luberon, which is not like any park you've ever heard about, but it's a quintessentially European type of park where it's a historic landscape, it's a peopled landscape, there are villages in the landscape, and people enjoy it for its open space and historic and scenic values, and it's very well protected, but it is not like Yellowstone. It's not locked up and development excluded. There's lots of development. There are people living and working in the park. And that reflects the fact that there's very little public land ownership in Europe, and there's a long history of development. And so the whole way in which the scheme of protected lands has developed in Europe is quite different than that in the United States. So we'll be meeting with the people who manage the Luberon Park and understand the distinctive features of that European park system. So there'll be lots of contrast and compare moments, and hopefully that the course will consist of, you'll be seeing a set of recurring problems: protecting farmland, controlling sprawl, limiting energy usage, and you'll look at it from one state's perspective or one country's perspective, and then you'll realize that another state, another country is addressing that same problem in a completely different way. And hopefully it'll sort of open your mind to the variety of ways in which law and policy affecting land use can be pursued. So that in a nutshell. Tom wisely mentioned that apart from all the fun, the basic course requirement is that a short paper, I think we said about 15 pages, be developed, which could be on any of the particular topics we're talking about. It could be a sort of more general set of reflections on the experience. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, I think we're very flexible, and we do want to try to make it as comparative as possible, because I think that's going to be more useful for you.
So, so that's the basic outline. Have I broken any rule? Have I failed to mention any applicable rules or broken any rules?
No, John, I was just going to add two things quickly. One is that John is of Basque heritage, which he may not have revealed to you, but they are well known as the most thrifty people on the European continent. So he is going to try to keep the cost down. Fortunately, he's matched with someone who is Scottish, and the Scottish people are supposed to be more thrifty even than the Basques, and that's McHenry. And so we've done everything we can to try to make this trip as reasonably priced as possible, which means the accommodations will be serviceable but not fancy in any way. Probably some form of dorm or double, triple sleeping accommodations. The accommodations down in southern France will be nicer, but they'll be perfectly adequate, and we'll make sure we have hot showers and all that kind of stuff. But we did try to make the course as inexpensive as we can with a reasonable budget, so as many people could take it as possible. And then the other thing we want to mention is that we do have a need for a minimum number of students, and John and Courtney or Ann can tell me exactly how many that is. But if you are interested in taking the class, we want to encourage you to do so. We are going to need a critical number, and we're going to need some deposits probably by, I think, April 1st was our deadline, John, but hopefully well before then, so that we can make a variety of arrangements, because there's a whole bunch of people
and, other travel arrangements we need to make over in France.
I'll mention that we're gonna open registration for this particular class and this class only earlier than registration opens for all the rest of the summer classes and classes for next year, because we need to know sooner. Registration for everything else opens at the end of March, but I think we're aiming for early in February to open just for this class.
Yes.
Tom mentioned accommodations. So at some point will we know how much money to set aside for that?
Well, as I say, our estimate is 1,800, if you want to round up to 2,000 to be safe,
Okay.
as the costs in France for food, food, train, and housing.
Okay, thanks.
And as Tom said, they're not going to be luxurious accommodations, but if you want to stay at the Hilton.
I was gonna ask if we can choose, like, can we,
And you could stay with your cousin
okay, cool.
if you were so lucky. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can we stay with your cousin?
Yeah. Well, they have everyone here.
I told you he's a Basque, what do you expect?
It seems trivial, but I mean, everything sounds awesome. As far as like, I don't know what France is like that time of year. I mean, I'm wearing like suits to these meetings and shorts in the countryside, or is it like?
I mean, it's in the countryside. It'll be. I mean, May is a nice time to be in France. It'll be beautiful. It'll be late spring. It will be comfortable outdoors. It'll be warmer in the south, but it will not yet be hot. I don't think, maybe Tom, because, he's a partner in a law firm, will feel compelled to wear a tie on a few occasions. But, I don't think we're going to be expecting any of the students to be wearing dressing. You need to look presentable, and probably you need something other than blue jeans for several of the meetings we're going to be doing, particularly in Paris. But it's not going to be a dress-up affair. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, typically I have found Europeans, and particularly European lawyers, to be more formal than American lawyers. And so I would think, what we would call in LA business casual, long sleeve collared shirts and slacks, not blue jeans, would be expected. And I would probably wear a tie or even a suit with a couple of them, just as, the connecting person, but you wouldn't feel any need to have to wear a coat and tie or, similar garb. And I think more casual down in southern France, correct?
Yes. No, you would be laughed. Well, you would not want to put a tie on southern France. And you would need to bring shorts, because you might discover that it's hot. It's a hot spell. And did I mention wine tasting?
So what if, like, you're not registered for classes, or suppose you're doing a clinic for the summer? You could take the clinic for credit, but how would that work?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
So
I mean,
if you're not taking other classes necessarily during the summer?
Oh, that's fine. I mean,
That's
you can-
okay.
Yep. And if you're a master's student, you would take this class for master's credit. If you're joint degree, you could also take it for master's credit. If you're JD only, you can, take this class, add it on. I mean, the tuition for summer classes is, if you're a JD only student, it's going to be over and above whatever you're paying in the fall and spring semesters. You would just pay on a per credit basis for that class. If you're doing the clinic, I believe it doesn't start until after the France program. Generally, they don't want you taking other classes while working in the clinic, but this one is before, so I would think it would be okay. I'll also mention this class would allow you to come back and still be able to take a Friday class in the summer. You'll be back in time for that, because the Friday classes actually start the second week of regular term one. So.
And if you were a JD MELP and you really were a glutton and you wanted to take ecology in the first term?
Yep, this would also allow you to take ecology, which also starts the second week of the term, so the week when you get back. What also is going on that you can take is the 3 Essentials of the Electric Grid course, which does run for 3 weeks, but each week is its own unit. So when you come back, you still have the second and the third unit, if you will, if you wanted to take some energy classes that first term.
So you take the 2 essentials of it.
You're good. You're good.
But the phrase class is a 3-credit class, so you're not, by going to France, you're not going to be at any disadvantage credit-wise. It's the same as any other term 1 class.
How much is it for each summer credit? How much does it cost?
I think it's $14.35 or $13.45.
$13.45.
$13.45 a credit.
Well, I think we should break, but please email me if you have, I know most of you, send me emails and for further questions. Or... Yes?
Is there already a twin site or a Facebook page for this?
No, I think Mary's putting together a webpage.
Oh, is she?
I think she's putting together a webpage for the course. For the moment, basically this is what it consists of. And obviously, we'll be developing more detailed, itinerary. I mean, we have the itinerary pretty well down, but there'll be a detailed itinerary and where we're going to be and what the schedule of meetings is going to be, and the readings will be provided. Obviously.
So we don't yet know the minimum number needed for this to actually happen?
I think that's sort of a. We are. Let's put it this way: we are hopeful that we have had some alumni interest, we've had some significant student interest, and we're optimistic that between the two we will have sufficient critical mass to make this work. That's where we stand.
John, can I jump in for 1 sec?
Yeah.
Yeah, quickly, we would of course greatly appreciate knowing whether you do have a strong interest in taking the class as early as possible. And, John, Courtney, Ann, or me, and John, Courtney or Ann or John give you my email. And then we are going to need that firm commitment so we can start making the preparation. So this is one where, just beg you to let us know as quickly as possible if you think you are interested in taking the class. And then if you are, we will have some good reading for the class, and there won't be, I think, a requirement to do any of the reading until, shortly before the class starts. But if you are interested, and even if you can't take the class, there's an absolutely terrific history of France since 1870 by a guy named Professor John Merriman, Merriman, who teaches at Yale. And they put his course on iTunes University. So you can go to your iTunes account, and go to iTunes University, and for absolutely free, you can download the 22 or 25 lectures that he gives on the modern history of France, which would be and you can listen to those as you're walking or biking or hiking around or gardening or whatever, would be a great introduction for anybody who feels that they'd like a little bit of grounding in French history and politics, and would, I think, measurably assist you in enjoying the class.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.